The U.S. was the only vote against the resolution for an immediate unconditional ceasefire. And the Commonwealth states just recognized what they call a Palestinian state. What does it mean? What should we make of it? What do you think?
So I find it very curious that so many countries are intent on kind of wanting for the Palestinians what they've never wanted for themselves, which is a state if it has to live next to a Jewish state. To the credit of the Palestinians, and long before they were known as Palestinians, just as the Palestine Arabs, they made it very clear that they are not interested in another Arab state on the lands of the defunct Ottoman Empire if that state has to live next to a Jewish state. They've made it repeatedly clear, and I wonder why no one still is willing to give them the respect of taking them at their word. The only kind of Palestinian state that Palestinians have enthusiastically embraced is one that I've come to call Schrodinger's Palestine. Meaning that is Palestine a state for the purpose of accepting responsibility for having invaded Israel and butchering Israelis? Is Palestine a state for simply recognizing that no one in Palestine is a Palestine refugee into the 5th generation? That would be weird. Is Palestine a state for the purpose of recognizing that its people do not have a right to settle in another state of which they were never citizens, what they call the right of return? Is Palestine a state for all these adult, responsible purposes? No, cat is dead. Is Palestine a state for the purpose of harassing Israel in international bodies? Then, why, yes, very much Palestine is a state and the cat is alive. Even just today, as Palestinians welcome the recognition officials, what they say is basically, thank you, and now we need to work to isolate Israel in every way possible, and the US if it continues to support Israel. So as far as they're concerned, the value of the recognition is the only value they're really interested in, which is the value of harassing Israel. If, the Commonwealth countries and so many try to pretend that this is an act that promotes kind of the two-state solution, one Jewish, one Arab. I'm like, fine, this is what you think you're doing, then be consistent. Create a recognition package. Say the following: we recognize Palestine. We therefore are defunding UNRWA because it's really weird to claim that you're a refugee into the 5th generation in your own country. We're making it clear, we're issuing a formal legal opinion of the Commonwealth that there's no such thing as a right to settle in another country of which you are never a citizen, what Palestinians call right of return. We're going to issue this as a recognition package, also reiterating that the Jews are indigenous and have a historical connection and the right to self-determination. And this will be our recognition package. Had they done that, first of all, that would have been a real consistent recognition with the idea of a two-state solution, one Jewish, one Arab. And I doubt there would have been a single Palestinian kind of celebrating that kind of recognition. I'll correct, there would be 4 Palestinians whom I know and admire and respect who would have welcomed such a recognition. But no official Palestinian would have welcomed such a recognition.
Who are those 4?
So by name?
By name.
By name. One of them is Mohammed Dajani. He's been active for many years trying to promote an Arab and Muslim vision of moderation. It's interesting, his family, the Dajanis, were charged by the Ottoman Empire with kind of guarding the tomb of King David. So maybe that is something that allowed him to recognize that the Jews are not foreigners in this land. They have a historical connection, and we've written together and spoken together. John Aziz is someone who's very active online and really, to his credit, repeatedly makes it clear that the vision of peace is next to a Jewish state. There are people, Bassem Eid, Ahmed Abu Tama, but they live in East Jerusalem. So, and then The last one that kind of has joined the people I mentioned is Ahmed Fuad al-Khatib. He's not making it easy. He's often making very incendiary claims at Israel. But he is, to his credit, making it very clear that he wants Palestinians to forgo the vision of return, of what he calls this endless resistance. He makes it very clear that it has brought nothing good to the Palestinians. He's the first Palestinian in a century to establish an organization, an NGO, that actually calls for changing the Palestinian ethos. It's called Realign for Palestine. So other than them, who would have really welcomed this kind of package recognition that makes it clear that Palestine there's no refugees, there's no right of return, it's about living next to a Jewish state. Other than them, who are courageous individuals, the Palestinian ethos remains, unfortunately, tied to the negation of a Jewish state in any borders, in any size.
You mentioned two people in East Jerusalem.
Yeah.
What is the intricacy of the fact that they're in East Jerusalem?
Because sometimes in East Jerusalem, because they're actually part of Israel. Israel annexed many Arab villages after 1967, turned it into the municipality of Jerusalem. They can become citizens if they want. Some of them are. So in general, what you find with Arab citizens of Israel, whereas the Palestinian ethos outside Israel and outside East Jerusalem is uniformly organized around the negation of Jewish sovereignty, Arab citizens of Israel, including some in East Jerusalem, you could say have more of a spectrum. You still have those that, despite being citizens of Israel, would very much, and they make it clear, would very much like to see the Jewish state disappear, or at best see the Jews as a minority in an Arab state. But you do have something that have come to call, even though they might not call it themselves, Arab Zionists, which is essentially Arabs who acknowledge the Jewish right to self-determination in the land. As I say, it doesn't have to be an exclusive right, a superior, but they recognize that it's an equal right, and again, that the Jews are not foreigners in the land, that they have a historical connection, and that Israel is merely the modern political expression of the uninterrupted, unbroken connection of the people of Israel with the land of Israel.
What is what were the conditions for the recognition of the Palestinian state? Were there any conditions? Did they say that the recognition was immediate with no conditions? What were the terms?
There were no conditions. There were no terms. Not even, for example, releasing the hostages unconditionally. If anything, there were opposite terms. So the declaration of the Saudis and the French was that they reiterate this right of return, again, even though there's no such right, which means that the only recognition they really had was of two Arab states. An Arab state in the West Bank and Gaza with no Jews, and another Arab state that will replace Israel through the settlement project of millions of Arabs, what they call the right of return. What you did have, I wouldn't even call it a condition, there was an excuse, which basically said that we're recognizing a Palestinian state with no Hamas. But this is something that doesn't exist. Even the French president tried to pretend that there's no Hamas in the West Bank. Now, the reason that Abu Mazen, as people like to half joke, is in the 21st year of a 4-term presidency, is that everybody knows that if elections are held in the West Bank tomorrow, Hamas wins handsomely. So I don't know where exactly is that Palestine without Hamas. We saw on October 7th the euphoria, the ecstasy on that day among all Gazans when they still thought that Hamas was about to finally succeed in realizing what I call the Palestinianist vision of no Jewish state. Hamas is not some alien body to the Palestinian vision. Hamas is merely the most recent and brutal executor of that vision. It gives it an Islamist cover, but it's the same vision. It's the same vision for decades now. I always bring the quote by Ernst Bevin, since we're talking about the Commonwealth, the British Labour Foreign Minister after World War II, when he needs to explain why Britain actually failed to fulfill the mandate that was given to it unanimously by the League of Nations to help the Jewish people achieve sovereignty on one sliver of the Ottoman Empire, right? They didn't betray the Arabs. The Arabs got plenty of states on the lands of the Ottoman Empire, but the Jews, who are a people of the empire, and had they received their fair share proportionally based on the population in the empire, Israel would have been multiple times the size of what was proposed. To explain the British failure, Britain basically, only the Jews didn't get a state, and this is a British failure to fulfill the terms it received from the League of Nations. He says, look, the conflict in the land between Jews and Arabs is irreconcilable. He calls it irreconcilable in February 47. This is before there's any excuses. There's no occupation, there's no settlements, there's no Netanyahu, and there's no displacement. So he calls it irreconcilable, and he goes on to explain. He says, for the Jews in the land, their top priority is to establish a sovereign Jewish state. So the Jews want to exercise the principle of self-determination for the people of Israel and the land of Israel. And then he says, for the Arabs, the top priority, and it's interesting, it's their top priority, he says, the point of principle, he calls it. These are the Arabs who will later hijack the name Palestine, that was historically known to mean Jewish, in order to be known as Palestinians. He said their top priority is resist to the last. Apropos the word resistance, in Hamas, it's mukawama, right? Resistance, resist to the last the establishment of Jewish sovereignty in any part of the land. He's basically saying this is a conflict between the Jews wanting a state and the Arabs wanting the Jews not to have a state. So go back to the present. This has always been the Palestinian vision. Long before there was a Hamas. Hamas is merely the most recent and brutal executor. And if there's no Hamas tomorrow, this still is the Palestinian vision, what I've come to call Palestinianism. So they will always produce organizations that seek to realize it. And nothing in the recognition, nothing in the UN declarations put a stop to Palestinianism. No one bothered to say, enough. You can live next to a Jewish state, but not on its ruins. All they did was continue to fuel and feed the Palestinian vision that the Jewish state can one day be gone.
Why do you think that is?
It's a question I've struggled with because, to the credit of Palestinians, they're very clear, they're very consistent. On this issue, they don't lie. They lie on everything else: famine, genocide, open-air prison. When one lie is revealed, they turn to another. But where they do not lie is about the fact that their entire identity is wrapped up in the rejection of a sovereign Jewish state. This is why even when they embrace the recognition, they make it very clear that it's on the path to isolating Israel, that there will be return. I mean, they make it very clear that their vision has remained unchanged from the river to the sea. All you have to do is give them the respect of listening to them, of taking them at their word. Why is not that happening? And I've been at it for at least 15 years now, 20 years even, and the facts are so clear that sometimes, the most benign explanation is that it's inertia. I've created this notion there is feeling good and there's doing good. And I realize that most foreign policy and politicians and, people just want to feel good. They don't want to really do good. Doing good, whether it's about your health or parenting or governance, requires doing a lot of things that don't feel good. But people just they don't want to bother. They don't want to do the hard work. They don't want to say, we recognize Palestine. There's no right of return. You're not refugees. This is the package. That wouldn't feel good, but it would actually do good. So one part is this whole kind of, people don't want to really bother with the hard work of doing good. That's the most benign explanation. But sometimes the less benign is that this is a kind of neo-colonial attitude that refuses to look at the Palestinians as agents of history. I found over the years that there's one message that I give that meets with a wall, and it's the message that Palestinians are adults. The notion that they are agents of history, that they know what they're fighting for, that they are truly dedicated to the non-existence of a Jewish state, that they're willing to sacrifice and suffer for that, a wall. And the darkest explanation I have, and it's not a thought that I had before October 7th, but it's a thought that I had to let enter my mind after. And the thought is this. It's not that the West or the Europeans don't know what they're doing when they're funding UNRWA, when they're recognizing Palestine with return or without kind of any limitations. It's not that they don't know what they're doing. Perhaps they actually do know what they're doing. And that's kind of the darker thought that I had to let in, that there is still something deep in the entrails of the European and Western mindset that feels deeply uneasy with the existence of sovereign Jews.
Going back to what you said earlier, and then I want to come back to that, the various conditions for the Schrodinger's Palestine.
Yes.
Some of the things you said are things that a lot of people may not be familiar with. For example, the multi-generational refugee status. Yes. Just go through those
Sure.
elements that you talked about.
Sure. So the 20th century has a very simple political arc. It begins when much of the world is divided between empires, and it ends when much of the world is divided between states. When lucky, those are nation states. They have a certain coherence of ethnicity, nationality, religion, language.
Go back for 1 second. Most people who object to Israel say that they object, or at least many people say that they object to the idea of nation states, to the idea of ethno-national borders. But you just said if they're lucky. So tell me what the benefit of that is.
When I remember the first time I heard the word kind of ethno-state spewed, and my immediate response was like, that's the norm, you know. If anything, typically it's Americans who will say that, Americans not recognizing that their national project is the exception rather than the rule. We can discuss how much America lives up to its effort to be a kind of post-national, post-ethnic democracy, but we'll leave that aside. Yes, the principle of self-determination that governed the arc of transition from empires to states recognized that there's such a thing as a nation, a people, that nations have a certain coherence of language, ethnicity, religion. Even if they're not religious, let's say like some of the Scandinavian countries, they might be nominally secular, but they're Lutheran, like the underneath religion is very clear, even if it's no longer officially active. So those are the things that kind of form the coherence of a nation. And the entire principle of self-determination meant that the self are the people who are self-organizing to govern themselves free from empires. Now, why am I saying when lucky? Because what, again, a lot of people in America are not aware, especially in America, is that the spread of democracy went hand in hand with the spread of nationalism and nation states. People think that nationalism is against democracy. It was actually the other way around. Because if you think of full sovereignty democracy, full suffrage democracy, it's a rare thing and it's very recent. The idea of one person, one vote is incredibly recent in human history, and it's a radical idea. It means that you and I have the same amount of power over each other's life. So my willingness to give you the same power that I have over myself comes from an understanding that at least we share something. We have some basic element of trust between us. And humans still, communities of trust, are based on those things: language, history, nation, ethnicity, connection to land. And that was the basis of trust that actually allowed the spread of democracy and to have one person, one vote, political units that were based on the nation state. That's when they're lucky. When they're unlucky, the receding empires still had enough time to draw a line in the sand and kind of throw together multiple nations, ethnicities, religions, and tell them, you're a state. The trajectory of those states, and that's why I'm saying they're unlucky, is to have been ever since engulfed in civil wars, dictatorships, civil wars, dictatorships. There are neighbors, right? This is Syria, this is Iraq, this is many countries in Africa. That's when they're unlucky, when they didn't go through a process of self-determination. Now, broadly speaking, this entire transition from empire to states, hopefully nation states, was bloody. It involved 2 world wars. If you want to know essentially what the 2 world wars were about, they were about this transition from empires to states. 2 world wars, numerous regional wars, like in the Indian subcontinent, local wars. In the process, tens of millions of people became refugees. They fled across these newly created borders of these self-determined states, or these lines that were drawn. They fled across these newly created borders, typically to the side that was more ethnically, religiously, linguistically similar to them. They knew that's where safety was. Some of them were expelled, as in the Germans after World War II, as kind of a way to hopefully ensure that Germany never becomes the cause of war in Europe again. Tens of millions of people became refugees. The message for all of them was essentially, it's sad, it's tragic, it's tough, move on. Because the understanding was that moving on is how you achieve peace. Because the empire is gone, these multi-ethnic empires are gone, the new political system is based on states with borders. If people will not move on, it will be war forever. And indeed, the one place that has perennial war is the one place where one group, the Arab refugees from the war, in parentheses, a war that should not have happened. They could have said yes to another Arab state on the lands of the Ottoman Empire, but no, it was more important for them to ensure that the Jews have nothing. As a result of this war, which they failed to achieve their goal of preventing Israel from declaring independence, they became refugees. Nothing special. There's nothing special in becoming refugees in war, certainly not in a war that was entirely unnecessary. What is special is that those Arab refugees are the only refugee group in the world who has been indulged in essentially being able to maintain themselves for generations and saying, we refuse to move on, we refuse to settle, because the war didn't go according to how we wanted. So only when we win that war of no Jewish state can we call it quits. And the way they did it is an organization was established to settle the Jewish and Arab refugees from the war. There were Jewish refugees. Many Arabs remained in Israel, but wherever Arab armies conquered territory, as in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, no Jews remained. Full, complete ethnic cleansing. That's an actual ethnic cleansing. The Jews were settled by Israel, so basically Israel says, no need, we'll manage. The Arabs are to be settled by a temporary organization, and the reason that the organization was temporary is because it was understood that it only needs 18 months to settle the Arabs. I always like to bring the example of another temporary organization established at the same time called UNRWA, the case for Korea. There's a war at the same time in Korea. 3.1 million people become refugees. That's more than 4 times the number of the Arab refugees. UNRWA settles all Korean refugees. No one goes home. They are all settled in South Korea. They are no longer refugees. It happens in 3 years with a third of UNRWA's budget. And look at South Korea today. K-pop demon hunters, great country that could have been the Arabs. But no. The Arabs, for whom there was an agency, UNRWA, basically said, we're going to hijack this agency. We're going to ensure that it never settles a single Arab refugee. They used a lot of violence to ensure that.
Explain that.
Initially, when UNRWA is established, it's staffed by Westerners. Mostly people who came from the New Deal in America. The idea was to create great development projects for Syria and Jordan and Lebanon and Egypt, where the Arab refugees were, and this way they'll be settled. The Arab refugees themselves, people say they were pawns. We go back to the fact that they're adults. The Arab refugees themselves, not yet called Palestinians, they burnt down UNRWA offices, they attacked UNRWA staff, basically making it clear that they refuse to allow UNRWA to do its job of settling them.
This is not Hamas. This is not...
No, there's no Hamas yet. This is the Arab refugees themselves. There's no PLO yet. They're not even organized. But they are still pretty much already with the view that the one thing they have to make clear is that the Jews will not have a state. And they understood that if they're settled, it means that the Jewish state gets to live. And that was the one outcome that to them was unacceptable. The Arab countries, as soon as it was clear that UNRWA is a failure and it's not settling a single Arab refugees, already in the 50s, everyone knew it failed.
Clear to the West.
Yes. And well, the Arab countries themselves who participate in that. It was clear that UNRWA is a failure. And the reason they knew it was a failure is because UNRWA was a success. They knew what success looked like. People all over Europe were being settled and moving on. At the same time, they knew what success looked like. So it was clear that UNRWA is a failure because not a single Arab refugee was settled. And they wanted to close it down. But the Arab countries basically came together to blackmail the West, to tell them, and this is the Cold War, and oil is important, so they had a lot of leverage to blackmail, basically said, you're never closing this. This is going to remain open, which is why UNRWA is still a temporary organization after 75 years. You're not going to close it. And not only are you not going to close it, they made sure that UNRWA has a kind of loophole where it doesn't have to abide by the general terms of refugees. Because in the late 40s, early 50s, the UN created the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, the body entrusted with dealing with all refugees in the world based on the Refugee Convention. And the Refugee Convention prioritizes ending the refugee situation in a lot of means. If they can return, that's great. If not, it doesn't prioritize it. Find a new home, find a third country, help them build a life wherever they fled to. They want to make sure that they're no longer refugees. The Arab countries understood that if the Arab refugees would be subject to the international norms of refugees, they would be settled, because that was the international norm. So they created a loophole that in the UN that said that the UN High Commissioner for Refugees deals with all refugees in the world except those that already have an agency. And then they made sure that their agency never closes, because as long as it never closes, the loophole remains. And that loophole allows them to register, contrary to international norms, millions of people as refugees, even though they're not refugees by any international standards. Nearly half of them are citizens of Jordan, born in Jordan as its citizens. Nowhere in the world are people refugees and citizens. Go back to the recognition of Palestine. The other nearly half live in the West Bank and Gaza, into the 5th generation. According to them, they live in Palestine. That's the Palestine they want the world to recognize. How are they still refugees? And you know, it's insane. I remember when I saw the itineraries many years ago of the Pope, of Prince William, it said they were visiting Palestine many, many years ago. Where's the first place they're taken to? A neighborhood that is misnamed a refugee camp. But no one there is a refugee. They were born in that Palestine, never left it. They're not refugees. So this loophole allows the Palestinians to avoid international norms when it comes to refugees, keep this notion alive, and all of it is not innocent. You can actually read the text and their views about doing that. They made it very clear that all of it is in the service of continuing the war that they failed to win in 48, 49 for the undoing of the Jewish state.
You've been saying this for 15 years, but it was only October 7th when you had the darker thought. It occurs to me that knowing everything that you knew, that the UN understood what the purpose of UNRWA was, that the UN understood there was a loophole, that the UN understood and that Western countries understood that there was a strange definition of refugee status only for the Palestinian people. Even if they didn't understand the depth of the connection between terrorism and UNRWA, the depth of the connection between the employees of UNRWA and Hamas, they understood what the project was. And you didn't think those darker thoughts?
Because when I started, together with my co-writer, Adi Schwartz, the one thing, we're proud of many things of the book, but the one thing that we're very proud of is that the book is unassailable on facts. Many people are not happy with its recommendations. There are no refugees, there's no right of return, dismantle UNRWA, all that. But it's never been challenged on the facts. So we thought, and that's what we did in the last 15 years, we went to European capitals, diplomats, parliamentarians, telling them, look at what you're funding. And the Palestinians are telling you. And we would tell them it even is against your own policy of a two-state solution. You are, on the one hand, claiming that your vision of peace is a two-state solution, one Jewish, one Arab. And in the other hand, you're pumping billions into an organization whose very purpose is to undermine the idea that the Jews should have a state, part of the two-state solution. So we came with it with a very rational kind of mindset. We're going to show them the facts. We're going to show them that Palestinians are saying that. We even showed them that, when President Trump really had the smarts to defund UNRWA, the Palestinian response was not, oh no, how will we pay for teacher salaries? The Palestinian response was the American president is trying to undermine our right of return. So we were like, look, the Palestinians view your financial support for UNRWA not as some humanitarian effort. They're viewing it as a global guarantee that one day there will be no Jewish state. And many of them would be like, no, that's not what we mean. I was like, but that's how they understand it. At one point, you need to assume responsibility of how your actions are understood. Even now, people are like, the Brits are like trying to ignore the fact that Hamas is very much welcoming this recognition, and they're trying to pretend that it's about no Hamas. But like, at one point, accept responsibility for how they perceive your actions. And you can't continue to say this is not what we mean when you don't even have the courage to even say that. We would tell officials, you know what, fine, don't defund UNRWA, but tell Palestinians, give them the dollar and say this dollar we're giving you is not a guarantee that you have a right of return. We want to make it very clear that you don't have such a right. We are just giving you a dollar because we think you need it. I was like, that doesn't cost you anything to say that. But even that they weren't willing to do. And I think it was not just October 7th per se, it was the combination of years and years and years of of bringing logical, fact-based, empirical arguments that actually rely all on what Palestinians are saying and doing, and seeing that Europeans, after seeing how enmeshed UNRWA and the butchers were, and it wasn't just that people who were directly paid salaries by UNRWA participated in the massacre. That is, you could say, kind of a fluke of the euphoria of the moment, because the Palestinians are very careful because they know that the West wants to make sure that money doesn't go to terrorism. The way they do it is that let's say the wife will be a teacher on UNRWA, and this way the salary will enter the family, and the husband will be a Hamas butcher, and this way they kind of supposedly the money doesn't go to terror. But in the enthusiasm and euphoria of the butchery of October 7th, a few people who are directly received salaries from Hamas participated. They wanted in. But that's not the issue. And this was my criticism within Israel. We should have said, because it became this kind of discussion, oh, these are a few rotten apples, but we should have highlighted the following. How many of those who participated and planned and financed the massacre, how many were educated in the UNRWA schools on this vision of return and no Jewish state? How many were falsely registered as Palestine refugees, despite, on their terms, living in Gaza, in Palestine, and never having been displaced from that? How many live in neighborhoods that are misnamed refugee camps? If we had asked those three questions, the answer would have been everybody. So I think it was just a combination of years of bringing this message and meeting this kind of disbelief that I gave it a name, West-plaining. No, they don't really mean it. We would meet European diplomats and be like, no, Palestinians know that they're not returning. They know. I'm like, no, they don't. They're actually very much active to achieve it. And the combination of October 7th and the response to like the enmeshment of UNRWA and the butchers, that is what I had to let the darker thoughts in, that it's, by now the facts have been out there for so long that to ignore them is a willful act.
Yeah, there's an additional post-October 7th, or really October 8th moment, where it used to be the case when people would say, from the river to the sea, and somebody would say, you know, that means all of Israel, and people would argue, no, it doesn't. But after October 8th, people would say, you know, that means all of Israel, and they would say, that's right, because Israel is illegitimate and doesn't have the right to exist.
Yes.
And that became a sort of legitimate argument or claim. It became something that was no longer morally unthinkable. What do we do in that moment?
Be afraid. Be very afraid. I've been following, so this is kind of my other thing that I've been working on and writing and following for about 20 years now. It's this thing that I've come to call the Placard strategy, that has been very carefully, very methodically been building for decades. And I call it the Placard strategy because you see it on placards in anti-Israel demonstrations that are built like simple equations. And on one side it says Israel, Zionism, sometimes they just draw a Star of David, then an equation sign. And the Placard strategy has been so successful that no one thinks that it says Zionism equals the political movement for self-determination and liberation of the Jewish people in their ancestral homeland, right? Which is the only accurate definition. It's just 10 words. The Placard strategy has been so successful that it's about 10 words. And everyone knows what they are. Imperialism, colonialism, apartheid, racism, then it escalates, ethnic cleansing, Nazism, genocide. And then the real clue is that in 2020, at the height of Black Lives Matter, a new placard appeared. Zionism is white supremacy. And I joke that, finally the Jews are white. They weren't white when it mattered. They're white somehow coincidentally, at the precise moment when whiteness was presented as the greatest evil. And that's the strategy. The strategy doesn't care about those words. Those words, certainly when it comes to Jews, are the inversion of reality. Zionism is the most anti-imperial, decolonial movement of an ancestral people reestablishing themselves in an ancient homeland. It saved Jews from conditions of apartheid in the Arab world, from ethnic cleansing and genocide in the Arab world and Europe. It definitely is not about Jews being white, regardless of where they're from. It's important for me to say, doesn't matter if Jews are Ashkenazi, they are not white. If Jews, left, were expelled from Spain and some went to Holland and some went to Morocco, it doesn't make one type of Jew of color and one type of Jew white. So Jews are their own thing. So those are not chosen because they have any relation to reality, certainly not for Jews. They're chosen because they are synonymous with evil. So what the Placard strategy has been doing for decades is this constant repetition. Israel, Zionism, Star of David equals evil. And it's on placards, it's in media, it's in social media, and then it's in institutions of prestige. That's where it matters. It's in academia. You'll get a PhD for Israel's an apartheid state. You'll get tenured for Zionism as colonialism. You'll have UN resolutions that are constantly laundering Zionism as racism, Israel's an apartheid state. Who knows that the UN General Assembly is one lousy country, one vote, that you can pass anything against Israel there? Nobody knows that. The UN still, even though it shouldn't, holds an element of prestige. And like one person who gave a talk, former Soviet operative who's an expert at mass manipulation, he said that mass manipulation requires a few key elements. And we're living right now through psychotic mass manipulation. He said, simple messages, simple visual symbols, that's the Placard strategy. Repetition, we live through that, we see that. And the key thing, he said, is prestige, because prestige suspends judgment. Every Madison Avenue executive knows that. Bring a celebrity, they'll tell you to buy a product, you'll buy it. Prestige suspends judgment. So the idea is that we are surrounded 360 by this notion that Israel, Zionism, Star of David equals evil. And after October 7th, a new placard appeared. And it said the following: keep the world clean, using the environmental language. And it had an image of a Star of David or a flag of Israel in the trash bin. And this is what you say, what became legitimized. This was the culmination of decades of this mass manipulation strategy, very methodically pursued. It came to its full culmination and flowering. The idea that we are on the cusp of a clean world, a better world, utopia, and the only thing that's standing between us and utopia is the collective Jew. And this explains queers for Palestine and feminists for Palestine, and people saw that and they're like, that's stupid, don't they understand the values of that society? But my argument is that they're operating on a deeper kind of logic that says there's utopia. It's not a coincidence that all the evil words are on the side of Israel, Zionism, Star of David, and all the good words, freedom, equality, justice, rights, are on the side of its negation, Palestinianism. And the idea is this, and it's one of the most dangerous and ancient ideas when it comes to the world attitude to Jews. It's that the collective Jew stands between this messy world and utopia. Racial utopia, salvation, human rights utopia, whatever the utopia of the moment is. And what so many people saw on the GoPro cameras of the Hamas butchers streaming worldwide on October 7th was the birthing of utopia, which I know sounds insane, but this idea that the collective Jew stands between this world and utopia is the ideological basis for the atrocities committed against Jews. This is the source of the ecstasy and euphoria that was global on that day. One of my favorite writers, Hussein Abu Bakr Mansour, he has a beautiful Substack. He's an Egyptian who de-radicalized himself really through smarts and knowledge and research. And he called the October 8th kind of explosion of ecstasy and euphoria in the West, he called it a symbolic participation in the pogrom. And I thought that was right on. Because again, they thought that by doing that to the Jews, they are birthing utopia. And it sounds crazy, but this is the logic under Queers for Palestine. So when I say be afraid, when people are now openly saying, yes, a world without Israel would be a better world. This was a headline in an Egyptian newspaper a week ago. This is the noble goal. Again, it's the idea that it's a noble goal. I must tell you, we should be deeply concerned, because once this idea takes hold, once societies fall for the mass psychosis that the only thing standing between them and a better world is the collective Jew, we are in very dangerous territory.
So for Jews in the U.S., we're on the precipice of a likely Zoran Mamdani mayor in New York. And at the same time, President Trump has been wielding a sort of hammer rather than what in legal terms really ought to be a scalpel with universities, etc., with their problem with anti-Semitism. And there are various terrorist-supporting legal immigrants who are being attempted to be deported by the administration, and free speech advocates are defending them on free speech grounds. What do you think of the situation in the U.S.?
So my sense is that we're not even close to understanding how grave the danger is. When people use the term the anti-Semitism problem in the university, they think of it, okay, some Jewish students are harassed with Free Palestine, unpleasant. What universities have been doing is to serve as institutions of prestige, to launder the idea that the collective Jew stands between this world and utopia. That's what they've been doing in serving as these laundering institutions of prestige. So I'm not sure we're in a scalpel situation. I have to share with you, when it started in the universities, people said, oh, how could it be among the educated, all that. And I was like, did you learn no history? The mass psychosis can only proceed once it's among the educated, because again, that gives it the prestige to go to the masses. And again, it now proceeds under the respectable mask of anti-Zionism, of Palestinianism, but the universities have been the places. So anti-Semitism is not a student being harassed with Free Palestine. Anti-Semitism is the mass psychosis of a society that the collective Jew stands between it and a better world. That's where we're at. We're not at the point of free speech. I mean, again, this is maybe for America, but for Jews, we are in a very, very different situation. And you spoke on the other side of it. Mamdani is a mayor. Mamdani should he be mayor, he's building on, by now, a true and tried alliance, what's called a red-green, and I would add Jewish liberal alliance, which takes at the time it was Marxists, communists, woke, but again, the same kind of thinking. Again, this secular dichotomy that represents the kind of thinking with the Islamists, and with Jews who, unfortunately, again and again, fall for, because there's something deeply Jewish in it, for the belief that together we'll build a better future for all. And this has always been the alliance that threw the Jews under a bus. And it's the alliance that, in Iran brought Khamenei to power. And that the Jews of Iran are, in LA. They're not, you cannot stay in those places. This is the alliance that corrupted the UN. This is the alliance that has laundered, the Placard strategy. It's the 57 Muslim countries in the General Assembly, plus historically all the Soviet and the non-aligned. Those are the countries that have repeatedly laundered the Placard strategy through the institutions of prestige. So it is a coming together of a lot of dangerous elements. The feeling of Jews that they are politically homeless now, both on the right and the left, is not something small. Political homelessness precedes civic homelessness, precedes general homelessness. That's the process. The fact that Jews are saying, we can't even go anywhere politically. The golden era where Jews could vote for people who shared all their values is over. And even voting survival, as some Jews said when they voted for Trump in this recent elections, someone wrote, "It's lovely that you, non-Jews, can vote your values. I voted survival." But even that might now be undermined. So it's a dangerous situation, but I have to share with you a thought that I'm reflecting recently a lot on my imaginary but typical Viennese Jew. He's 37 years old. It's 1902. He lives in the best place, the best time ever for Jews. Before New York in the 20th century, Vienna at the end of the 19th century, best place to be a Jew. There's this Herzl guy that says that this is all going to end very, very badly. And he has this bizarre idea of a Jewish state. Now I'm thinking, that Viennese Jew, let's assume that he died in 1932. Had a great life as a Viennese Jew, and when he died, Herzl was still crazy as far as he was concerned. And I often wonder, would that Viennese Jew been better off leaving in 1902, leaving cosmopolitan Vienna, where Jews were the arbiters of taste? Was he better off leaving that Vienna for a malarial-infested land in the Ottoman Empire to try to build a vision of a Jewish state? Or would he have been better off just living the rest of his life in Vienna? So I often think about it in the context of Jews around the world, even because I've been going to so many Jewish communities before, but certainly after October 7th, and they're all playing what I've come to call Jewish Sudoku. They're like, okay, Canada is going downhill, so where should we go? Australia's not great. Israel is, surrounded by people. So the difference between keep the world clean in 1930s Europe and keep the world clean today it's global. And that's the reason that for me it's even a greater concern. I was recently with the Jewish community in Australia, and they told me, look, Australia was supposed to be this faraway place that none of this ever touches us. And it's here. So the logical conclusion of what we're saying is terrible. If I try to be optimistic, I would say that the only country that will have a chance, because no other country that ever submitted itself to this mass psychosis, whether in Europe, whether the Arab world, whether Iran, whether the Soviet Union, whether Eastern Europe, never ended well, not for those countries and certainly not for the Jews who suffered the brunt of the damage. America has a certain, foundational common sense to it. We saw it when The college educated were tearing down the posters of the hostages. And, two working class people were telling them this is wrong. America has something of that I still hope will salvage it to just stay enough. We are not, as a country, going to submit ourselves to this mass psychosis. I told the delegation of Republican members of Congress, I spoke to them about a year ago, told them, look, you think you won the Cold War, but you might wake up one day to discover that even though the Soviet Union is long gone, they have defeated you, just like they did to the Germans, by inserting into the bloodstream of your most hallowed institutions, your most educated elites, the one virus that, if cloaked in respectability, as they did for the Germans with the protocols of the elders of Zion, as they did for the West with anti-Zionism as a respectable academic practice, they've inserted into your bloodstream the one idea and virus that is known to drive societies mad. So see it and put a stop to it.
Well, I'm sort of speechless.
Sorry.
What I have been saying about anti-Semitism is that it rises when it's popular. We all live in a prestige economy, and when people gain social currency with anti-Semitic attitudes rather than losing social currency for having them or displaying them, then more and more people will adopt those attitudes. So it's only playing that game of prestige that can defeat it. How do we make anti-Semitism unpopular again?
I'll start by saying that I don't like being this person. I wish I could say different things, but this is what I see, and I can only share with people what I see. I can see only two paths. The terrible one, of course, is the one by which anti-Semitism became discredited in the past, which is it was followed to its horrific logical conclusion, and people are like, okay. And then it had to be couched in new, respectable terms, because the old anti-Semitism became discredited. So one way is that it is allowed to go to its logical conclusion. This is I gave it in a speech in 2019 in my opening remarks about whether is anti-Zionism anti-Semitism. And I said, when all of this will go through its full logical arc, then the world will wake up and say never again. So one horrific path is that it actually becomes discredited by following its logical arc. The other is the one that I said, that enough people in countries, especially where Jews live, America, Canada, Australia, France, Britain, who possess prestige and common sense, a rare combination, will stand up to say, not here. We are not going to live through this going through its logical arc. But that's what we need. Those are the allies that we need. We need allies who are non-Jews, who possess prestige and common sense, and with our help can see where all this leads and will stand up to that. We don't have the numbers. That's our only chance.
Well, I sort of hate to leave it on that note, but it seems like that is the place to leave it. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.